Welcome back to Bumblebee. For some chills and thrills, viewer, I hope you've got the sage and salt ready because you'll need it for today's video on the top 10 most haunted castles in Europe. Starting with the home of the British tabloid's favorite family, Windsor Castle as number 10. While the title of the oldest castle does go to the citadel of Alpepo, Windsor Castle in Windsor, England takes the title of the oldest castle still in use today. This royal residence started construction in 1070 and managed to survive sieges, the English War, 2 world wars, and a whole lot of internal backstabbing. As the primary residence of the British monarchy, it pretty much ensures that the castle is always inhabited, so that means there's always someone or something around. The list of ghosts which are said to share the castle with the British monarchy and its 500 staff members is endless. First off, Henry VIII is just sort of kicking it, all short and angry still. The former king had injured his leg in the past, leaving it gnarled and ulcerated. You can learn about this and more about Henry in the Bumblebee video, Top 10 King Henry VIII Facts You Never Knew. While you're at it, you can take a second to subscribe to the Hive for more videos like these ones. But anyways, many visitors and workers in Windsor Palace have reported the short, stocky ghost of a man limping or sometimes even dragging himself through the corridors. At times, people have even claimed to hear him shouting in empty rooms. Maybe he's trying to avoid his ex-wife Anne Boleyn, who's rumored to be seen standing at the Dean's Cloister weeping. The majestic library of Windsor Castle has a regular visitor, Queen Elizabeth I, who's usually wearing a black dress and shawl. Her metal-tipped heels will click distinctly as she walks. And believe it or not, King George III claims to have spoken with her ghost in that room. And lastly, Charles I, who was held prisoner in Windsor Castle and later lost his head there, is also seen roaming around the castle. Elsewhere in England is the Lennox Castle, number 9, found in East Dunbartonshire, just north of Glasgow. 2 locations that mean nothing to me, and I have no idea where they are, but I always tell you as if you do, and you should too. This mansion and castle were built sometime around 1840s for John Lennox Kincaid, the Earl of Lennox. However, in 1927, the castle was purchased by the Glasgow Corporation and converted into a hospital for the mentally ill. As you can imagine, that means it's a place they sent mentally ill people, but also homeless, clinically ill, and women on their periods who have opinions and stuff like that. So buildings cropped up around the main castle structure to eventually hold more than 1,200 patients. And when it opened in 1936, it was considered ahead of its time and the best equipped hospital of its kind. But towards the end of the century, however, fights, unrest, and riots began to break out. By the 1980s, standards had deteriorated to the extent that the British Medical Journal found residents dangerously underweight and malnourished. The hospital's medical director, Alistair Sim, said in 1986 that he had never worked in a worse pit. In 2002, the Lennox Hospital is finally retired and all other buildings on property are knocked down. Today, the abandoned castle has fallen to fire and nature, but remains a beautiful, eerie ruin, still inhabited by ghostly patients. Countless urban exploration visitors vouch for the smell of rotting meat, ghostly handprints, having things thrown at them, or even being thrown themselves. Want proof? Type Lennox Castle into Google and hit search, because the videos are endless, just one after another of home footage that arguably couldn't be doctored. Over in Denmark for number 8, it's Dragsholm Castle. So this is found in Zealand, Denmark. This castle didn't stay one for long either. Not because it burnt down or some tragedy or something, but because the Danish crown decided to just make it into a massive prison. After making that conversion in the mid-16th century, captives included the former castle's own owner, Joachim Ronewand, and the Earl Bothwell Brockenhus, Mary, Queen of Scots' 3rd husband. The spirit of a woman wearing a white dress is often seen lurking on the grounds of this former hellhole, and the White Lady, as she's come to be known over the years, was of noble lineage. She did the unimaginable and had an affair with a servant, and this didn't bode well with her father, the owner of the castle. He had her thrown in the castle dungeons, and for hundreds of years her restless ghost has been spotted roaming the lands. Freakier still is the fact that in 1900, when excavations took place there, a female skeleton was found where the dungeon must have been, wearing a white dress. Part of the splendor of living in a castle was having servants at your beck and call, and apparently one maid's ghost roams the castle to this day to make sure everything's running like clockwork. But it's the Earl of Bothwell Swedish names, Alger Brockenhus, who earned the title of the castle's most famous ghost, spotted riding into the castle grounds with his horse carriage. And now we have Huska Castle for number 7. The mysterious Huska Castle in the Czech Republic has an unsettling story despite its awe-inspiring Gothic architecture and stone walls. First off, it's located in the middle of nowhere. Secondly, the immediate impression you get from looking at the castle is that it's a structure built to protect those on the outside from that which is within the walls of the castle. Even its defenses face inwards, not outwards, and stray animals stay away from the site. Some also say that Huska may be built according to the principles of sacred geometry and consequently may be a portal for teleportation or time travel. Perhaps this is because Huska Castle, which was built in the early 13th century, was not designed for residents. distance. The first known structure existing on the site was a small wooden fort that stood in the 9th century, mentioned by Václav Hajduk in his extensive Czech chronicle published in 1541. In the same chronicle, Hajduk also recounts a legend, the story of a strange crack in the top of the limestone cliff, unimaginably deep and reputed to be the source of strange visitations. In fact, it's said the stone evidence that now stands built around the crater in the ground, believed to be a literal gateway to hell because demons and winged creatures would pour out of it. Then, to make matters worse, the Yazidis take the Republic during World War II and use this castle for grotesque activities. Paranormal activity enthusiasts swarm to the site like to honey babes. We've got ghost hunters, world's scariest hauntings, we have amateurs and pros alike. Most people tend to keep their visitations brief, mostly because they get driven out only after a couple hours, reporting feelings of constantly being watched. Some people say they feel an irresistible aversion to even entering the building in the first place. For number 6, it's back in England. It's the notorious Tower of London, which is not a tower. It is in fact a building. Quite the deceptive name. Apparently, its first ghost didn't even wait for the foundation to be laid before cropping up. St. Thomas of Canterbury's ghost made its first appearance during the construction. Henry III, whose grandfather rumoredly killed St. Thomas, decided to build a chapel in the tower for the Archbishop. Just like that, apology seemed to be accepted because his ghost was never seen again. Sightings of Lady Annabella Stuart are common, however. She was the one who tried to marry the nephew of Lady Jane Grey, William Seymour, without permission from King James I. Seymour was imprisoned in the tower while Lady Stuart was placed under house arrest. The arrangements to escape failed, and while her beau made it to freedom, the unfortunate noblewoman was recaptured and remained in the tower till her death, which was rumored to be caused by a guard trying to do bad stuff to her. And then the ghost that travels, Anne Boleyn's restless spirit, wanders the tower, where she was locked up amid her many accusations, most of which correlate with the deception and affairs against her husband, Henry VIII. Anne was beheaded at the tower and apparently spent her last hours before in complete psychological meltdown, something that must have left a distinct imprint of her soul, seeing as her headless spirit wanders the property crying from a stumped neck. Number 5 is another cliffside queen. It's Prejama Castle, a Renaissance masterpiece built within a cave that's on a cliff in southern Slovenia. It was built during the early 13th century by legendary knight Aramis of Luig, and what made him so legendary, however, was being a massive thief or a major hero. History can't be sure, but it's a hell of a story. The Slovene version of Robin Hood would supposedly oppose the tax system of the Duke of Ivan Wolfsnout by stealing from the rich and providing to the poor. The other storyline, though, puts Aramis at the center of a conflict between Austria and Hungary. Andreas Bokenkircher, Amaris's best friend, was one of the knights who changed sides, leaving the Habsburg monarchy and joining the forces of the Hungarian king. Austrian Emperor Frederick III got Andreas killed, and at a reception in Vienna, while defending the honor of his dead friend, Aramis killed one of the emperor's relatives, making him have to flee. At both stories end seeing the Slovene Burgrad besieged in the castle, testing its impregnability. With the water source at a disposal and secret tunnels leading out of the mountain providing access to food and supplies, the siege lasts over than a year, and Aramis enjoyed taunting the soldiers, until he was betrayed by one of his servants. The invaders bribed the servant to light a candle on the window, which would give a signal his master was in a vulnerable position. Aramis was shot by a cannonball at the spot, and according to derogatory rumors, the spot was his toilet seat. With so many residents that lived and died here, ghosts have been reported by tour staff and TV shows alike as ghost hunters abroad, and to quote them, "I've been to many spooky places, but never heard anything like that before." This next title sounds like a horror movie mansion name. It's Fuzuki Manor for number 4. This neoclassical beauty was designed by the architect C.L. Engel for Lars Magnus Brockenham and his family, breaking the distinct visual of countryside manors at the time by using stone and brick rather than the classic here wood-built styles usually found in Finland's rural areas. It was built in 1836 with an addition built in 1837, making it the largest estate in Erejoki at its time. As for ghosts, well, what websites I could find that were able to translate paint us a picture of small ghostly figures playing ball on stairs, elevators that move up and down of their own accord, door handles that turn unexpectedly, and even the sound of a specter running down the hallway behind you. Let alone there's a rumored blood-stained flagstone on the floor that just can't be scrubbed away. Over in idyllic Italy, it's number 3, Carini Castle. Dating back to the 12th century, this castle in Prejama is a grand display of culture. Its medieval walls date back to the 11th century, but there's also some elements that were later added from the Arab Norman culture, such as the pointed arches. But it's one story that earned this castle its number 3 placement. During the 16th century, the castle was inhabited by Laura Lanza, the Baroness of Carini, and her family. Laura was the firstborn daughter, and when she hit her flow, she's immediately married off to an older man. Laura, trapped and miserable, happens upon a lovely young fellow named Ludovico, with whom she starts a passionate love affair. Laura and Ludovico stay together in secret happily for a long time until their bubble is burst on December 4th of 1563, when Caesar, Laura's father, discovered the secret relationship. Her father goes into a rage, screaming how she's nothing but a sinner and blasphemous, and he kills his own daughter as well as her lover in this raid. The legend tells that Caesar repeatedly drove a dirk dagger into her, and Laura's grasping and seeking hands left bloody imprints on the wall around her. And even now, on December 4th, every year in Carini Castle, the blood-stained handprints Laura left behind appear visible to the eye. However, Laura herself has never left, supposedly running through the castle halls and screaming for someone to help her to this day. Number 2 is all witches and werewolves. It's Windsor Castle. Just outside of Salzburg, Austria, Windsor Castle was the site of the Salzburg witch trials between 1675 and 1690. Consequently, 139 people were killed inside walls on accusations of witchcraft, but there could always be more that we don't know about because all but 2 victims were beggars during a time of mass hysteria caused by famines, plagues, and disease. These poor souls would be tormented for hours, and at worst even having their hands cut off with burning hot rods and then paraded through town. Now, lingering spirits reportedly haunt the castle, helping it earn the nickname Witch Castle. Not haunted enough, in the 1800s, long after the witch trials, Windsor Castle became known for sightings of werewolves. Deer and cattle were constantly found dead on the ground, torn to shreds and dismembered. So suspicious locals concluded werewolves were occupying the castle. As a result, the villagers rushed said castle, and the current Windsor residents are all accused of werewolves and subsequently tormented and killed. The castle was abandoned for quite a few decades after that, and I don't blame them. Last but never least is number 1, Leap Castle, aka what's often called the most haunted castle in the world. While some historians claim the castle dates back to the 15th century, others argue it was built around 1250. The story goes that Leap Castle was first built by the Oberon clan, but then in the late 15th century was seized by the notoriously violent O'Connell clan, and so its bloody legacy begins. To give you an idea of how bloody we're talking, during the renos in the 1900s, workers found an underground dungeon behind the wall in the chapel, and there were so many skeletons down there it took 3 cartloads to remove all the remains. So it goes that the O'Connells spent the 16th century duking it out with Earl of Kildare, who manages at one point to knock down part of the castle, kill a bunch of folks, and drive the family out. But 4 decades later, however, they reclaim it, just in time for bitter contention amongst the O'Connell siblings to hit a boiling point. As the story goes, the victim, who happened to be a priest, was in the midst of family mass when his angry brother storms in and kills him with a sword in front of their entire family. This gory incident earned the property's church a fitting title, the Bloody Chapel. To this day, visitors report seeing shadows wandering near the priest's house, and some accounts also suggest the sighting of a broad-shouldered, heavy-set man pushing a barrel up the stairs, and as soon as he gets to the top, he rolls it down before disappearing. There's also the Red Lady, who'll lurk in the castle alleyways, armed with a dagger she brandishes to harm you as if before disappearing. This poor woman was stolen from her family by the O'Connells before being left die. But the worst of it all is if you decide to tour this castle and you notice the smell of decaying flesh and sulfur, then chances are you have encountered it. It is all this creature's known as, seeing as it appears to be the size and somewhat looks like a sheep, but moves as if it's dragging itself, yet at a super fast speed, and it has like a decaying human-esque face. Many claim ghosts wander the corridors, so it's no surprise that paranormal investigations have taken place. Leap Castle's been featured on shows like ABC's Family's Scariest Places on Earth, Most Haunted, and of course the famous 2-hour abroad special by Ghost Adventures. Alrighty, we are at the end of another video. Thank you so much once again for tuning in, and I hope to see you again soon. Be sure to like and subscribe to see more from us, and drop a comment down below. If you have to spend the night in one of these places, which is it gonna be? For me, it's Prejama Castle. It's just way too cool to pass up. To an older man. Laura trapped. What the f are they doing? Sorry. Laura travels in Europe. Am I clicking too much? A little too much? This hand's really loose. I know it's worse. This one's not that bad. Okay. Starting with the home.